Tony, I'm excited to talk to you because one of the big themes that I think we've been talking about over the last year and coming into the new year is this idea of federalism. And kind of the first, I guess, thesis I want to test with you to kind of start off a conversation. We'll talk about some of the reforms to the social welfare programs at the federal level and what that means for kind of the balance between the federal government and states when it comes to responsibility in administering these programs. But first, because of all these conversations and the debates in 2025 about the One Big Beautiful Bill and the work requirements and how we administer social welfare programs to help address poverty, the big thing that's been on my mind is that I feel really strongly we need a lot more federalism across the board with all kinds of policy issues. I really think that if we were able to sort of push more decision-making and ownership of issues out of the federal government to the states, I think in many instances we'll have better policy outcomes and we'll reduce political polarization because it won't feel quite so existential. I feel that especially strongly with the social welfare system. I just want to toss that out. Is that right? Is that wrong? How would you approach that issue as we think about how we work on these issues in the new year?
Well, it won't surprise you. Somebody who works with the Center for Practical Federalism is in favor of your idea. There's so many challenges. Like when the government shut down, federal government, for a number of weeks. I think many of us heard this statistic that maybe was surprising. It should be surprising that you have 42 million people on food stamps. 42 million people, and if you're familiar at all with that federal program, which for the longest time it's just money that comes from we taxpayers, goes to Washington, gets layered with a bunch of rules designed to make sure that nobody ever gets out of that cycle of poverty, and then the money's thrown back out to the states. And the states have very minimal investment in that. So it's the worst possible system, in my opinion, because people in Washington, some of whom I think at some level they actually want more dependency, they're the ones setting the rules for how we take care of the poor in our own states. And it's inefficient. You can't, with a lot of these programs, you can't even use the money to test whether the program works, right? The federal government forbids it. So just from an efficiency standpoint, it doesn't make any sense that we do it that way. And if you have federalism, you have more options to try it differently. There are different ways to feed people. And I think if you have more control closer to home, the average American does not want to see generation after generation in the same family dependent on strangers to feed them, right? Assuming that it's not generation after generation of complete disability that makes them unable to feed themselves, because we all want to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. But we see generations of people who won't take care of themselves. And the programs that we've designed in Washington, it's almost like they're intentionally created to make sure people never get out of that cycle. So it's not only efficiency then, but it's compassion, because it's not compassionate to keep people permanently dependent on government. That's the opposite of compassion. And, when I saw that 42 million number, I thought, my goodness, something's not right,
Tony, that resonates with me a lot because we've talked a lot on this show in the past about the need to reform our social welfare system, that really this vision that should be broadly popular, should be adopted by all of us. And I think if you were to poll Americans, they would agree with this, that the goal of the social welfare system should be to provide some temporary help to alleviate material suffering, provide some stability for folks who are struggling, while helping them move back towards work-based self-reliance. And in my view, it seems like sometimes it's hard to get that right with these programs from the federal government. So we need the states to sort of own their role as innovators, as leaders, and we should pursue policy reforms that help make that more possible. And it seems like that's one of the things that happened in the 2025 passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill. We talked a lot in previous episodes about the work requirements portion of that bill when it comes to Medicaid and SNAP. But there's a recent report from October 2025 from the Alliance for Opportunity with the Center for Practical Federalism by Les Ford. She's great. We've had her on the show a number of times. But I want to ask you about it because with this report, we'll link to in the show notes, called What States Can Expect with the New SNAP Match, Options to Reduce State Error Rates. So, Tony, I wonder if you could give us an overview, and recognizing that if you go to the general public and say, hey, we're going to talk about food stamp error rates, that sounds really dry and kind of wonky. But there's a bigger sort of governance principle at play here that seems important to me. So, can you kind of give us your thoughts, broadly speaking, on a high level? What is happening with this new legislation that's been passed? What are states going to face down the line when this stuff gets implemented?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that report, because it's ready made for policymakers in states who want to adjust their programs while they still have time. Because the OB3, the one big beautiful bill, it's going to have real penalties for states that are not administering the food stamp program properly. And so the backstory is, um, the Biden administration for 4 years went out of their way to pressure states not to do proper eligibility checks. And states had little incentive to resist that because the federal government's footing the bill for the food stamps. And so we know that that meant that millions of people began to access benefits who are not eligible. They don't meet the requirements, um, but they're getting it anyway. And that was by design out of the Biden White House. And so now what the OB3 does is it says, well, you have to fix that. So only a handful of states, I think Utah is one of them, have administered their programs properly all along. And so they don't really face this big penalty. But other states, like my state of North Carolina, faces a $530 million annual penalty starting, I think, in 2028 if they don't fix their program. So, in a nutshell, it's trying to create an incentive for states to do the responsible thing, which they would do if they were footing the bill in the first place. Back to your point about federalism, uh, they have to start doing the responsible thing and do proper eligibility checks and make sure that they're not issuing these payments to people who can provide for themselves. It's that simple. It's just immoral, to spend, especially with $38 trillion federal debt, to be spending all this money for people who were never eligible to receive those benefits in the first place. It wasn't intended for them. So that's probably one of the biggest changes. And so that report that you referenced, it just has some practical steps that any state could take to begin fixing their error rate immediately, and they still have time before those penalties start to kick in. But they only have about one more year. And so what we found is a number of states, when you talk to lawmakers, they're kind of surprised. They don't even realize that this tsunami is coming, and it is a massive fiscal hit for a lot of states. A lot of them Republican controlled. So our hope is they get their houses in order pretty quickly.
Tony, we needed to take a break in a couple minutes, but I want to close the loop on something, because when you talk about SNAP error rates, from the report, just one of the top line findings says that the food stamp error rate is far too high. Between 2013 and 2024, the food stamp error rate more than tripled from 3.2% to 10.93%. I know you mentioned that there were some decisions from the Biden administration. Do you have any sense of, that seems pretty dramatic to go to triple the food stamp error rate. And when you put it in the context of what you're saying, that Americans, I think, are compassionate people. We are blessed with a vibrant free enterprise system that allows us to have some resources as a country to help those who struggle. And I think Americans support that, broadly speaking. But we want it to be administered well and accurately. So a tripling of the error rate does seem pretty concerning. Can you give any thoughts into how did we get to that point over the last 10 to 12 years? And why you think this shift in the federal legislation, with sort of pulling in states, maybe forcing states, hey, you need to have a stronger seat at the table to help us get this right. Why does that feel like a good step forward?
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out that time range, because pretty much any bad idea we saw out of the Biden White House, they learned from the Obama administration, and so they were kind of applying similar pressure back when they had power, and states had an incentive to just roll over because if the way the program has been structured, the state is going to foot at least some of the cost for its um, administration of the program, including eligibility checks. And so the state could essentially just not bother to check eligibility, just trust whatever income people write down when they file for benefits, and then the feds are going to write the checks. Essentially, they send the money to the states can write the checks. So there was no incentive. Back to the federalism incentive. If you're sloppy like that as a state and your taxpayers are footing the bill, number one, they're going to be mad about all the taxes they're paying. Number two, layabouts from other surrounding states who can't get a check that easily where they are, they're just going to come live in your state and let you feed them. So it's an attempt to try to create an incentive to manage the program properly. Because as we know, any of us, especially we have teenagers, right? If you're not the person footing the bill, sometimes you can be a little more careless with the resources, whether it's the gas in the car, the family car, or the snacks in the pantry, or in this case, food stamp benefits.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.